Yeah. Hello, my friends. If you're ready for more terrifying stories, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. I was driving back from a photography trip in upstate New York when my car started making a sound I've never heard before. A low, grinding whine that gradually escalated into a violent shaking. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping it was just a temporary glitch, but the engine died completely. I looked around and saw nothing but thick woods, the kind that pressed in on you from both sides of the road, and a faint glow far ahead. As I trudged through the mud toward the light, I realized it was a town, or what appeared to be a town. The sign read, "Hallows End," in faded, peeling letters. The place seemed deserted. The few lights that flickered were weak and yellow, barely illuminating the cracked pavement. I found a small diner first. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and inside, the air smelled like cold coffee and dust. One man sat at a corner booth, hunched over, and looked up as I entered. His eyes were hollow, and his skin had a strange gray pallor, but he smiled politely. "New in town?" he asked. "Yes," I said, trying to mask the unease curling in my stomach. "My car broke down." "You'll find a motel a little further down Main Street," he said, voice flat like he was reading from a script. "Room 3 is empty. They don't like strangers much, but it's yours for the night." I thanked him, though his words felt heavy, almost warning me. The motel was a simple aging building with a flickering neon vacancy sign. The receptionist, a thin, sharp-eyed woman, handed me the key with a nod but said nothing. I followed her gaze as I entered my room and felt for the first time the creeping sensation that I was being watched. The room smelled faintly of mold, the carpet worn thin in places, and the window looked out onto a parking lot surrounded by trees that seemed too close, their branches clawing toward the building. I unpacked quickly, telling myself it was just my imagination. Exhaustion pulled me into sleep almost immediately. I awoke in the middle of the night to a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a soft knocking, coming from inside the room. At first, I thought it was the radiator, but the sound moved, circling me, echoing faintly off the walls. Then came a whisper, so quiet I barely caught it at first. "Eli." My name, drawn out and guttural, not spoken but felt, pressing into my mind like a weight. I froze, convinced it was a dream, yet the shadows in the corners of the room shifted, stretching and curling as though alive. The next morning, I tried to leave. I had to make sure my car could be fixed, but as I drove toward the edge of town, the streets didn't match what I had seen earlier. Intersections twisted unnaturally, roads looped back on themselves, trees leaned inward over the asphalt, blocking the way. And somewhere, just at the edge of my vision, I felt it watching. Something tall, impossibly thin, faceless, always there, always still. Over the next few days, the events escalated. I stayed at the motel, but I was never alone. Items in the room moved without explanation. The dresser drawers opened, then slammed shut. My backpack slid across the floor while I slept. The air grew heavy, thick, suffocating, and the whispers became words. Phrases I couldn't understand but felt in the pit of my stomach. Sleep became impossible. Shadows bent into forms, faces that appeared briefly then vanished, limbs that moved in ways they couldn't. I began talking to the locals, hoping to find some explanation. Most avoided me, whispering behind doors. One man, who introduced himself as Harold, finally spoke. He said, "They don't like outsiders. Hallows End. It doesn't want visitors. If it notices you, it doesn't forget." I didn't understand. "What doesn't want visitors?" I asked. "The town. It's alive," he said. His voice dropped to a whisper. "It feeds on those it traps. Fear, desperation. That's its nourishment. If you've seen it, you can't leave." I laughed nervously. Superstitions, I told myself. But that night, the whispers came again, louder, insistent, forming a chorus that filled the room. I could hear shapes moving in the corners, twisting, stretching, always watching. One shadow in particular, the tall, faceless one, leaned in impossibly close, and I could feel its presence pressing against my chest. My heart raced. I understood finally that the town itself was not just haunted. It was alive. I found a notebook hidden beneath the floorboards in the room. The previous occupant had written frantically, "I tried to leave. Roads twist. Streets return to the same place. The people, they're not people. Not really. I hear the whispers in my sleep. The shadows watch. They know when I wake. They know when I sleep. I am trapped. If you are reading this, don't stay. It notices, and once it notices, there is no escape. There, I couldn't ignore it. I packed my things and tried to drive out again. The forest closed in. The roads bent unnaturally, looping back on themselves. I saw the faceless figure standing silently in the middle of the road. I hit the brakes. It vanished. I tried again. The streets rearranged themselves. The forest seemed to press in from every side. I began to understand that distance and speed didn't matter. The town was patient, deliberate, and it had marked me. I began noticing the townspeople differently. Their eyes followed me too long, then darted away. Smiles were slow, almost mechanical. Occasionally, I would see the faceless figure in place of someone, its height bending the body unnaturally, limbs too long, a head tilted in ways that made me shiver. The town was patient. It didn't rush. It observed. It waited. It fed. One night, I confronted it. I stayed awake deliberately, watching the shadows creep along the walls. The tall, faceless figure appeared in the corner of the room, stretching impossibly, limbs bending at impossible angles. Its voice entered my mind as though the room itself spoke. "You should not be here." I didn't mean to," I stammered. "You belong," it said. And in that moment, I realized that I already did. The town didn't need to attack me physically. It only needed to watch, to feed on my fear, and I was already trapped. The following days became a blur. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Time lost meaning. Shadows moved constantly, dancing along walls and furniture. Whispers rose and fell like waves, a chorus in a language older than the town itself. I tried leaving, but every road led back to Hallow's End. Every turn returned me to the same streets. Even when I thought I had escaped, the faceless figure appeared in mirrors, windows, puddles, even darkened screens. I eventually moved far away, hundreds of miles from Hallow's End, thinking that distance would protect me. I was wrong. The shadows appeared in corners of my apartment. Whispers filled the silence. Doors opened when I knew they were closed. Objects vanished, only to return hours later in impossible places. I caught glimpses of the faceless figure at the edge of my vision. I could feel it, patient, inevitable, always watching. I've come to accept the truth. Towns like Hallow's End do not just hide secrets. They claim people, they mark them, and once they claim you, the town waits patiently, inevitably, to reclaim its due. I am marked. I am already part of it. No matter how far I run, I will never escape. One day, it will come for me, and I will belong to Hallow's End forever. No one who sees it ever truly leaves. I have learned that. The fear never ends, and neither does the watching. I never intended to stop in Grayson. I was just passing through, driving back from a conference in Boston, hoping to make it home to Vermont before nightfall. But the rain came first, heavy and sudden, and my car began to sputter as the engine coughed and died. I steered off the highway and down a narrow, winding road flanked by dense woods, hoping to find a place to wait out the storm. That's when I saw the faint glow of a single gas station, its pumps abandoned, and just past it, a motel with a flickering neon sign that barely spelled out vacancy. I didn't have a choice. I parked my car and went inside. The motel office smelled of damp carpet and stale coffee. A man was behind the counter, tall and thin, with eyes so dark they almost swallowed the light. He didn't smile. He didn't greet me. He just handed me a key and said, "Room 6, enjoy your stay." There was a strange weight in his words, like a subtle warning buried beneath the monotony. I nodded, paid, and took the key, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being studied, measured, and judged. The room was small, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked a deserted parking lot and the dark woods beyond. I unpacked my bag, stretched, and tried to ignore the unease that had started as a whisper in the pit of my stomach. The rain tapped steadily against the window as I lay down, hoping exhaustion would pull me under. At first it did, but then I woke. It was around 2 a.m, though time felt irrelevant. At first I thought it was the wind, a branch brushing against the window, but then I heard the voice. My name, whispered, elongated. Ethan. The sound wasn't outside. It wasn't even in the room. It was inside my head, echoing in a way that made the walls seem to breathe. My heart began to hammer as I sat up, the shadows in the corners stretching unnaturally, as though reaching toward me. I told myself it was a dream, the stress of traveling, the storm outside. But the sense of being watched persisted. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. The whispers became words I couldn't understand, the shadows twisting into shapes that resembled figures, tall, thin, featureless, faceless, lurking in the corners, dissolving when I tried to focus on them. The next day, I tried to explore the town. Grayson looked normal in daylight. Small houses with peeling paint, a diner with faded red awnings, streets lined with towering oaks. A few residents walked past me, polite but distant, their eyes cold and calculating. I stopped at the diner, hoping to get some information about the town or the motel. The waitress, a woman named Marcy, smiled politely, but there was a tension in her face. When I asked about the town, or the motel, or anything unusual, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. People come, people go, she said. But some don't leave. Not really. I laughed nervously, assuming she was referring to old superstitions or town gossip. But her expression was too serious, too wary. That night, the situation escalated. The whispers returned, now louder, insistent, wrapping around me like a vice. The shadows in the room moved independently of the light, stretching along the walls, pooling across the floor in unnatural patterns. I felt a presence behind me, something heavy, oppressive, cold, like ice pressing into my spine. I spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. Yet I knew I wasn't alone. I tried to leave the next morning. I packed my bag and got into the car, hoping that a clear road and daylight would break the town's hold on me. But Grayson had changed. Streets twisted unnaturally. Landmarks I had passed earlier were gone. The forest pressed in, dark and suffocating, on either side of the road. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, head tilted to one side, faceless. I slammed on the brakes. When I looked again, it was gone. The feeling of being watched lingered, more intense than before. Over the next several days, I learned the true horror of Grayson. Objects moved on their own in the motel room. My bag shifted across the floor while I slept. Doors opened and closed without reason. Even the air felt alive, thick and suffocating. I began to hear the town itself, the low hum of something alive, patient and intelligent, pressing against my mind. I could feel it watching, measuring, learning. I realized the whispers weren't just in my head, they were everywhere, a chorus of voices, ancient and alien, shaping reality around me. I found a small notebook hidden under a loose floorboard in my room. It belonged to Victor Haynes, the previous occupant, who had vanished months before. The entries began innocently enough, notes about the motel, the town, but quickly descended into paranoia. They are here, watching, waiting. I can see them in the mirrors, in the corners of my eyes. The town knows when I sleep, when I wake. It feeds on fear. I cannot leave. If you are reading this, do not stay. It notices, and once it notices, it will never let you go. Reading those words, I felt a chill run through me. That night, the temperature dropped sharply in the room. The shadows thickened, curling into shapes I could not comprehend. I tried to sleep, but my body refused. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind, every movement of the shadows made my skin crawl. The faceless figure appeared in every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, puddles, and even in the darkened TV screen, staring silently. I attempted to leave again. I drove through the town, hoping to escape, but every road looped back on itself. Intersections appeared where there had been none, and streets twisted like a maze. The forest closed in. At night, the figure appeared in the headlights, standing motionless, faceless, unyielding. I began to understand the terrible truth. The town itself was alive. It didn't need to physically trap me. It could warp reality, bend space, and it had marked me. I could not leave. The townspeople became part of the horror. They avoided my gaze, whispered behind closed doors, sometimes standing silently at street corners, their eyes hollow, faces expressionless. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse of the shadows inside them, moving beneath the skin like some unnatural puppet. I realized then that the town consumed people slowly, replacing their consciousness with its will. And I was next. One night, I stayed awake, watching, waiting. The shadows thickened, pooling along the walls, stretching and twisting unnaturally. The faceless figure emerged, limbs bending in impossible angles, taller than any human should be, head tilted unnaturally. Its voice entered my mind and filled the room at the same time. "You should not be here." I didn't know," I stammered. "You belong," it said simply. And in that moment, I understood. The town was alive. It didn't need to attack. It only needed to watch, to feed on my fear, and I was already part of it. The following days, the motel room became a prison. Shadows followed me wherever I went. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. Days passed indistinguishably. Time lost meaning. The whispers became voices. The voices became chants. The shadows danced and twisted around me. I tried leaving, but every road led me back to Grayson. I began to feel the presence inside me, shaping my thoughts, feeding on my terror. I eventually found another notebook, this one buried beneath a loose floorboard in the diner. It was Victor's last entry. "It does not need flesh. It needs fear. Once it sees you, it will follow. You cannot leave. You cannot escape. The town waits, patient, inevitable. One day it will take you, and you will belong." I realized the truth. Grayson doesn't just hide secrets. It claims people, it marks them, it feeds on fear, despair, and isolation. And I was marked. I moved far away, renting an apartment in Boston, thinking distance would protect me. But it did not. Shadows appear in the corners of my apartment, whispers rise in the silence, speaking in that ancient, incomprehensible language. Doors open when I know they are closed. Objects vanish and return hours later in impossible places. I catch glimpses of the faceless figure at the edge of my vision. I can feel it, patient, inevitable, watching, waiting. Small towns like Grayson do not just hide secrets, they claim people. And once they claim someone, they never let go. I am always being watched. One day it will come for me, and I will belong to Grayson forever. No matter how far I run, I will never escape it. I never meant to stay in Millbrook. The town was small, barely marked on any map, and I was just passing through on my way home from a work assignment in the Midwest. My car had broken down on a narrow road that wound through the dense forests of upstate New York, and night was closing in. Headlights cutting through fog, I saw the faint glow of a single gas station and a motel just past it. Exhausted, I decided to stop, park, and rest for the night. The motel was old, paint peeling from the siding, neon letters flickering in bursts that almost spelled vacancy. A man behind the counter, skin pale, eyes too sharp, and a posture that seemed both stiff and unnaturally casual, handed me the key to room 5 without a word. "Enjoy your stay," he said. There was a subtle warning in the way he looked at me, though I didn't catch it at first. The room itself was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew. The carpet was threadbare, and the single window looked out over the parking lot and a line of trees beyond. At first, I slept well, though the floorboards creaked, and I thought the noises were just the old building settling. But the unease started the next night. At around 2 a.m, I woke to a faint tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on the door. I thought it might be another guest, though the parking lot was empty when I looked out. Then, the whispering began. Soft, indistinct, and so close it seemed to originate inside my head. Evan. Evan. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the room. The shadows seemed darker than normal, pooling in corners, stretching in ways that felt unnatural. I told myself it was the wind, an overactive imagination after a long drive, but the voice didn't stop. It called me again and again. I froze, unable to move, as though some unseen force held me in place. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a dream. I drove into town to get some coffee, but Millbrook was strange. Almost no one was on the streets. Houses sat empty, windows dark. The few people I passed gave me polite, tight smiles, but their eyes were cold and distant. I asked at the diner about the motel, about the town, about the people, and the waitress, an older woman named Claire, only shook her head. People come, people go, but some never leave, she said quietly, glancing toward the woods. She wouldn't elaborate. That night the whispers grew louder. The shadows moved independently of the light, creeping along walls, stretching across the floor. I saw shapes, tall, thin, faceless, linger in the corners, vanishing whenever I tried to focus on them. The air grew heavy, thick, almost suffocating. I barricaded the door, but it didn't matter. I could feel a presence inside the room, patient and deliberate, as though it had been waiting for me. I wanted to leave. I tried to drive away the next morning, but the street seemed to twist unnaturally. Roads I had driven only hours before no longer led out of town. The forest pressed in on both sides, dark and unyielding. And in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, faceless, standing silently in the middle of the road. When I braked, it vanished. But the sense of being watched remained relentless. Over the next few days, the experiences intensified. Items in my motel room moved on their own. My bag shifted across the floor while I slept. Furniture scraped across the carpet without explanation. Doors opened and closed, and always the shadows, always the whispers. I found a small notebook hidden under a loose floorboard in the room. It belonged to Victor Haynes, the previous occupant, who had disappeared months before. The entries started innocently enough, notes about the motel, the town, and daily life, but soon descended into paranoia. They are here, watching, waiting. I can see them in the mirrors in the corners of my eyes. The town knows when I sleep, when I wake. It feeds on fear. I cannot leave. If you are reading this, you must leave before they notice you. Reading those words, I felt a chill run through me. That night, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The whispers rose in volume, forming words in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. I was being watched. I was trapped. I tried to leave again. I drove for hours, convinced that if I just reached a highway or a larger town, I would escape. But Millbrook warped around me. Streets looped endlessly, intersections led back to the same place, and the forest pressed in, closing off escape routes. At night, the figure appeared in my mirrors, in windows, sometimes in my dreams. I began to feel it inside me, as if the town had marked me in some way I couldn't comprehend. The townspeople were no help. They avoided my gaze, whispered in corners, and sometimes I thought I saw the shadows in their eyes. Once I saw a man standing at the edge of the street, tall, dark, featureless, motionless. I blinked, and he was gone. But the feeling remained, creeping through me, a reminder that the town never forgets. One night, I confronted it. I stayed awake, listening, waiting. At 3:03 a.m., the shadows thickened, gathering in corners and along walls. The figure emerged, stretching impossibly, limbs bending at impossible angles, head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly. "You shouldn't be here," it said, a voice that resonated inside my head and in the empty motel room at the same time. "I didn't mean to," I stammered, my voice trembling. "You belong," it said simply. I realized then that the town itself was alive. It didn't need to attack me physically. It needed only to watch, to wait, to feed on my fear. And I was already part of it. After that night, the motel room became a prison. Shadows followed me everywhere. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating regularly. Time lost all meaning. The whispers became voices. The voices became chants. And the shadows, tall, thin, faceless, danced around me in the darkness. I tried moving again, driving out of town, but every road led back to Millbrook. Every intersection brought me face to face with the same figure. I began to understand the terrible truth. The town had claimed me, and it wouldn't let go. I began to see the town differently. Houses were not just buildings. They were alive, extensions of the same presence that haunted me. Windows were eyes, doors were mouths, and the streets themselves twisted and shifted to trap those it wanted. People were vessels, hollow shells, their consciousness absorbed into the town's will. And I, too, was becoming one of them. One morning, I awoke to find the notebook open beside me, pages flipping as though moved by invisible hands. More warnings written in a frenzied hand. It does not need flesh, it needs fear. Once it sees you, it will follow. You cannot leave, you cannot escape. The town waits, patient, inevitable. One day it will take you, and you will belong. I tried ignoring it, tried convincing myself it was all in my head. But the figure appeared constantly. Every reflection, every dark corner, every shadow that stretched longer than it should. I felt its gaze inside me, shaping my thoughts, feeding on my terror. I eventually moved to a city far from Millbrook, thinking distance would protect me. I was wrong. Shadows appear in the corners of my apartment, whispering in a language I still don't understand. Doors open when I know they're closed. Objects vanish, only to return hours later in impossible places. I catch glimpses of a tall, thin, faceless figure at the edge of my vision. I can feel it watching, patient, inevitable. The truth is simple. Small towns like Millbrook do not just hide secrets, they claim them. And once they claim someone, the town remembers. It waits, patient, inevitable. I live now under that knowledge. No matter how far I run, I know it will find me. One day, it will take me back, and I will belong to Millbrook forever. No matter where I go, no matter how far, I am never alone. If this story kept you on edge, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for the next one.